Brett Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise in opposition to this Overseas Investment Protection of New Zealand Homebuyers Amendment Bill. As my colleague Mr Yang has pointed out, this is a cynical bill from the opposition member seeking to perpetuate his fundamental approach that, as was evidenced just a few months ago, that he believes that public policy in New Zealand should be driven by the sound of people's surnames. It's an absolute disgrace for New Zealand. It's certainly a disgrace for the history of the party which he is a member of. But I'd like to set aside, so he's made a lot in his contribution this evening about his measure is all about stopping foreign speculators distort the New Zealand market. But then he refuses to accept, perhaps because it's an inconvenient truth, the reality of the data that illustrates that non-tax resident foreigners are not a major purchasing driver in the last 6 months of homes in New Zealand and particularly in Auckland. You see, what that data shows us, it's very clear, because Mr Twyford points out a very large amount, which is because why? Because it's not speculation, it's primary residences. And who's the largest group? Tax residents. Tax residents, Mr Speaker. So the member now has an issue with people paying tax in New Zealand to fund our infrastructure, to fund our schools, to fund our roads, to fund our essential services. They shouldn't be allowed houses as primary residences. Because when you look at that data, if the member was following his own contribution, the area of concern for him and which his bill should address are non-tax residents, people that aren't contributing to the infrastructure and public services of this country, non-tax residents buying a second, third or more property. And the data on that is absolutely crystal clear. That across New Zealand, non-tax residents making investment property decisions is less than 3%. And in Auckland, where the member would have us believe it is something like 40% or more, it's actually 4%. 4%. I'll tell you what, but I'll tell the member what was excluded: primary residences and tax residents. Why? Because we value people paying tax in New Zealand and funding our infrastructure and funding our public services. If people that are contributing to New Zealand in taxation, Mr Twyford, wish to buy a property here, that is perfectly fine. Instead, what we have, as Mr Yang has pointed out, a mere continuation of an anti-foreigner approach, trying to place a small group as responsible for the ills of the country. So much so that he would have, under his approach to public policy, Ms Lee unable to buy a house because, of course, she's Chinese. She tells me she's from the province of China called South Korea. They don't like being referred to as Chinese. So Mr Twyford, he comes with this odd... And look, the public could be excused, Mr Speaker, for actually wondering, with a bill such as this, which is targeting a group which the data shows isn't actually a distortionary factor, and which is a continuation of informing public policy by the sound of a surname, the public could quite rightly, I think, wonder if perhaps Mr Twyford is making a play for the leadership of the New Zealand First Party. It certainly isn't the sort of thinking that should inform good public policy in this country. It's not the sort of thinking that should inform a good private member's bill. And all he would do if we were to permit this to pass really is address a tiny, tiny percentage of the current property purchases. See, we're a party, we're a government that welcomes migrants, thank you Mr Speaker, welcomes migrants and welcomes foreign investment. People are going to come and form company structures if they're going to undertake taxable activity in New Zealand, whether they're paying PAYE or whether they're coming here and sort of direct foreign investment, helping to fuel growth in New Zealand. If they're going to pay tax in New Zealand, if they're resident here for taxation purposes, they are paying for the essential infrastructure and services which benefit all New Zealanders. And we don't mind where their country of origin is. In fact, New Zealand is a far better place for the diversity that has grown in this country over the decades and is so obvious today in any major metropolitan centre. That's the sort of thing that we on this side applaud and welcome. We don't believe that we should be setting public policy on the basis that we don't like someone's surname. We don't believe we should be having New Zealand which is trying to exclude people and exclude diversity. We oppose this bill and we call on all parties to oppose it.
Dennis O'Rourke.
Mr. Speaker,